Welcome back, everyone, and welcome back to Global Currency Watch. If you're tired of the panic, tired of fake countdowns, tired of emotional hype replacing real analysis, then you're in the right place. On this channel, we focus on calm breakdowns, structural signals, and the bigger financial picture behind Iraq, the dinar, and the global currency system. So before we begin, take 1 second to hit like and subscribe. It genuinely helps this community grow and help serious viewers find analysis that's built on logic instead of noise. Now, let's get into this, because this week, something important happened. Not loud, not dramatic, not one of those RV Tonight headlines. Something quieter than that, but honestly, much more important. This week, when you connected all the major updates together, the central bank language, the oil export developments, the IMF coordination, the Iran pressure, the white paper reforms, and even the Vietnam Dong conversations, a very specific pattern emerged. And that pattern is this: Iraq is no longer behaving like a country stuck in survival mode. It's behaving like a country preparing for financial normalization. That doesn't mean a revaluation tomorrow. It doesn't mean next Tuesday. And it definitely doesn't mean anybody outside Iraq secretly knows the exact date. But what it does mean is that the infrastructure underneath the system is becoming more sophisticated, more disciplined, and more internationally aligned than we've ever seen before. And tonight, I'm going to show you why. By the end of this video, you're going to understand why Iraq and Vietnam are suddenly being discussed together, why the oil export changes matter, why the pressure to cut Iranian influence is financially significant, why the central bank keeps using stability language, why experienced analysts are warning people about timeline obsession, and why preparation matters more than prediction right now. Stay with me, because once you see how all these pieces connect, the entire conversation changes. Iraq and Vietnam, the big connection. Let's start with something most people brush past too quickly this week: the comparison between the Iraqi dinar and the Vietnamese dong. At first glance, they look completely different. Different regions, different economies, different political systems. But structurally, they actually share something extremely important. Both currencies are controlled by their central banks. Neither one is fully free-floating, and that changes everything. See, in a free-floating currency system like the euro or British pound, the market mostly determines value naturally over time. But in a managed system, the government controls the rate intentionally. That means exchange rates can stay artificially suppressed for strategic reasons. Trade advantages, export advantages, political timing, reserve management, international negotiations. And this is exactly why millions of people around the world continue holding these currencies, despite years of waiting. Because holders are not waiting for the market to accidentally move. They're waiting for a policy decision. That distinction matters a lot. Now, does that guarantee a future rate adjustment? No, absolutely not. But it does explain why long-term holders still believe the currencies are undervalued. The logic itself is structurally sound. And honestly, that's important to say clearly, because this community has spent years being mocked. People say, "You're crazy. You've waited too long. It'll never happen." But the framework itself, it's not irrational. Managed currencies do operate differently. History proves that. The question is never whether change is theoretically possible. The question is timing. And timing is the hardest part of all of this. Iraq, moving away from Iranian dependence. Now let's move into something far more serious. Washington's growing pressure on Iraq to reduce Iranian influence. This is not just politics. This is financial positioning. For years, one of Iraq's biggest problems internationally has been the perception that portions of its economy were too vulnerable to informal influence. Smuggling routes, unofficial dollar channels, border leakage, militia-linked economic activity. These things matter because international financial systems depend on traceability and compliance. That's the world Iraq is trying to fully enter now. And when the United States pressures Iraq to separate itself from Iranian-backed structures, it's not just diplomacy. It's financial conditioning. It's basically saying, if Iraq wants deeper integration into the international banking system, then the financial environment must become more transparent. And that connects directly to the next major development, oil exports, because Iraq has quietly been adapting its export routes, building alternative pathways, reducing vulnerability around regional instability. Why does that matter? Because oil revenue is Iraq's lifeline. Without stable oil revenue, there's no strong reserve base. Without reserves, there's no monetary confidence. And without monetary confidence, serious currency reform becomes extremely difficult. Everything connects, always. That's what people miss. They look for one magical article, one magical announcement. But real financial transformation happens structurally, slowly, piece by piece. And that's exactly what Iraq appears to be doing right now. The IMF, BES, and US Treasury connection. Now here's where things become even more important, because Iraq is not navigating this process alone. This week, several analysts again referenced Iraq's ongoing coordination with major international financial institutions, the IMF, the US Treasury, the Bank for International Settlements. And that matters enormously, because those institutions do not casually involve themselves in unstable systems without long-term objectives. What Iraq is building now appears to be a framework designed for international compliance, anti-money laundering systems, digital banking infrastructure, reserve management, transparent transfer systems, official exchange channels. This is institutional-level modernization, not rumor channel fantasy. And honestly, that distinction matters more now than ever, because real reform is boring sometimes. Real reform looks like databases, regulations, compliance systems, digital tax networks, electronic banking, not fireworks, not hype. And ironically, the quieter the work becomes, the more serious it usually is. False alarms and timeline fatigue. Now I want to address something directly, because a lot of you are exhausted. And honestly, I understand why. This community has lived through years of "this is the week," years of countdowns, years of windows, years of excitement followed by silence. And that creates emotional fatigue. But here's the distinction I need you to understand. False timelines do not automatically mean false signals. That's important. Because many analysts correctly identified structural movement, but failed to estimate timing. And timing inside a sovereign monetary system is incredibly difficult. Governments move slowly. Central banks move carefully. International coordination takes time, especially when an entire financial infrastructure is being rebuilt underneath the surface. That's why patience in this space is complicated. You're watching real developments happen without always seeing immediate outcomes. And emotionally, that's hard. But this week, several experienced voices admitted something important. The signals may have been real. The timelines were simply wrong. That honesty matters, because realistic expectations protect your emotional stability. And emotional stability matters more than hype. Always. Central bank language matters. Now let's talk about the central bank itself, because one word keeps appearing over and over again: stability. The central bank continues emphasizing exchange rate stability, budget stability, dollar supply stability, market stability, and some people hear that and panic. Well, if they're talking about stability, then nothing is changing. Not necessarily. Stable systems are exactly what central banks build before larger transitions. Think about it logically. Would you introduce major monetary reform into chaos? Of course not. You build stability first, infrastructure first, confidence first, then transition. That sequence matters, and Iraq appears deeply focused on building that stable foundation right now. That's why the banking reforms matter. That's why the digital systems matter. That's why the anti-smuggling measures matter. Because stability is not the opposite of reform. Stability is often the prerequisite for reform. Preparation versus speculation. Now I want to shift this conversation towards something personal. Because if you've been holding currencies for years, then eventually you have to ask yourself an important question. What happens if something actually does happen? Seriously, do you have a plan? Do you understand taxes, exchange procedures, asset protection, wealth management, estate planning, investment diversification? Because sudden money without preparation destroys people all the time. That's reality. And honestly, The smartest voices in this community are no longer obsessed with predicting the exact date. They're focused on preparation, because preparation is controllable. Timelines are not, and that mindset shift is powerful. The people most likely to succeed long-term are not always the people who guessed the date correctly. They're the people who stayed emotionally balanced and financially prepared. That's the real game. Final scene, the bigger picture. So let me bring this all together. What happened this week? Not hype, not guarantees, not secret intel. Something more important than that. Structural alignment. Iraq continues moving toward greater international financial integration. Oil systems are adapting. Banking systems are modernizing. Political pressure is increasing toward transparency. International coordination continues quietly, and institutional reforms are expanding piece by piece. That does not guarantee a rate change tomorrow, but it absolutely suggests the long-term infrastructure is being built seriously, and that matters a lot. If you've stayed patient through all of this, that matters too, because patience under uncertainty is difficult, especially in a world addicted to instant results. So stay calm, stay grounded, stay informed, and most importantly, stay prepared, because preparation will always beat speculation. This is Global Currency Watch. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.